So welcome to another Photoshop tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to go through how to make a chipped paint texture on top of kind of a metallic background. So the end result should look a bit like what we have on screen at the minute. So before we get started, I'm using some images, or one image in this Photoshop tutorial. I just wanted to show you where I got it from. So I got it from a website called cgtextures.com, which is a royalty-free website that I highly recommend for anyone who's looking to get stock images for texturing or 3D modeling or just for references. So you can sign up for a free account and it will allow you to download 50 megabytes per day. You can also get a paid account that will allow you to download 750 megabytes per day. So the textures are kind of just broken into categories. There's tons and tons of stuff. So the file that I'm actually using for today's tutorial I got from here. So just to show you where it is, if anyone wants to use the exact same file, this is it here. So it's concrete bear 0280. Okay, and its texture number is 35243. Okay, so I'm just going to be using one of these. The reason I'm using concrete is the background is I want to show you how to make a metal texture on top of it. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to open up that file, or open up your base texture. So here's mine. Okay, I purposely downloaded a fairly big image because what we're going to do is we're going to crop out a section of this we want to use. So I'll just show you how you can check your image size settings. So if you go to image and then image size, you can see here this image I have is 3000 pixels width and it's 1979 wide. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to select a portion of this image that is 1024 pixels by 1024 pixels. So it's just going to be a square texture. So the way we do this is if you go to the second tool down in your toolbar, you'll find your rectangle marquee tool. Okay, if you can't see it, then it might be hidden underneath one of these other tools. So as I mentioned kind of in the previous tutorial, all you do is click and hold down and that'll give you a list. So with the rectangle marquee tool, as soon as you select it, your options bar up here will change. Okay, so just to kind of quickly talk you through what these do here, these are kind of the selection modes that you're in. So when the first one's put in, it's a new selection. So every time you click and drag, it'll make a brand new selection. Okay. The next one is add to selection. So I've already got a selection made here. If I click and drag another box, you can see I can build up kind of like a more complex one. Okay. Next one is subtract. So if I don't like any portion of this, I can click and drag a box and it will take away from my previous one. And the last one's intersect. Okay, so what happens is, I'll just quickly show you. If I have a massive chunk there, okay, and I grab my intersect, and I click and drag, my new selection is just going to be the portion where these two overlap. Okay, so that's just a kind of quick intro to that tool. Okay, in my later tutorials we'll probably be adjusting these, just depending on what we're making. The next thing is feather, which is kind of like the softness of the edge. But the section that we really want to work with today is the style. Okay, so as long as you make sure your first box is pushed in, so it means new selection. So every time you click and drag, you're going to get a brand new selection. What we want to do is come over here to the style. Now at the minute it's set to normal. That just means if I click and drag, it'll make a box whatever size I want. I haven't given it any controls, so I haven't said that it has to be a certain proportion or it has to be a certain size. So what I'm going to do is click on this menu, and we're just going to choose fixed size. Okay, as soon as you click on that, these two other windows become active, these two little boxes. In here you want to type 1024, so 1024 for width and 1024 for height. And now when you click, what it's doing is it's making a selection that is exactly those measurements. Okay, so what we want to do here is we can click and move until we're happy with it. We're going to choose a portion of this image that's got kind of a good bit of almost kind of scruff, like loads of cracks, loads kind of little dents and stuff. Okay, so I'm going to choose this side of the image. Again, if you're working on a different image, it's fine. And what we're going to do now is we're going to tell Photoshop that we want to crop our image down to this size. So the crop tool is located 3 tools below that on the toolbar. So here it is here. Again, if you can't see it, it might be hidden with a perspective crop tool, a slice tool, or a slice select. Okay, really important there, just the shortcut for the crop tool is C. Okay, so if you push C on your keyboard, this is what will happen. And all you need to do now is push enter, and then push enter again. And that's it done. So what we've done now is we cropped that image down to what we think is the best 1024 pixels by 1024 pixels. So just to show you that's definitely working, if we go image size, there's our new pixel dimensions. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to generate kind of like a sheet metal effect in Photoshop. So this is a really handy kind of base texture that you can use for a lot of different effects. So in order to do that, I'm going to just, while I'm going through, I'm going to show you a couple of different tools that maybe I haven't shown before. So the first thing we need to do is we want to make a new blank layer. Okay, so if we look at our layers panel, we've only got a background layer. We want to make a new layer on top of this. So there's a couple of different ways we can do it. The first way that I normally use is, if you look down here, there's a little icon at the bottom of the layers panel that looks like a little page with the corner turned up. You just click that once, that'll make a new layer. Okay. The other way of doing it, let's get rid of that one, I'll show you, is you can go up to Layer, New, and choose Layer from this menu. This will prompt you for a name. It's exactly the same. So we've ended up with the same result. And the last way to do it is, you probably saw it in the menu there, it's Shift, Control, and N. Okay, so that's 3 ways to do exactly the same thing. What I suggest to most people that I teach Photoshop to is find a way that suits you best and then stick with it. So from the very start, I've normally used the new layer button. So I just click there, and this is our new layer. So whatever layer you've highlighted blue in your layers panel is the one that you're going to be doing most of your work to. Okay, so all the filters, all the fills are only going to go to this layer 1. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'm just going to rename it. So to rename your layer, all you do is double click on the title and then just type in your new name and then push enter. So I've just renamed this metal. Now before I do my filter, what I want to do is set my foreground and my background color to be different from what they are at the minute. So your foreground and background color are located just at the bottom of your toolbar. They're also located up here if you have a color palette turned on. Okay, so all we do to change it is click on the first box, which is your foreground color. I'm going to set this to kind of like a mid-gray. Okay, so if you want to follow my exact settings, I'm using 132 for the RGB values. Okay, and we just hit OK. And we want to set the back box, the foreground color, the light one, and the background color we want to set to a slightly darker one. So all I do is click on that box, and what I'm using for mine is 62, 62, and 62. Okay, Photoshop will wait for you to hit OK, so you just hit OK. So the next thing we need to do is we're going to ask Photoshop to render us some clouds. And the way we do this is make sure we're clicked on the layer we want the clouds to appear on. We go to Filter, Render, and then Clouds. And there we go. So Photoshop has made us just a set of clouds just using our foreground and background color. So obviously if we had these set to something totally different, we would get a totally different result. Okay, so if you want to do like rusted metal, it might be a good idea to use oranges and stuff like that. Okay, but for now I'm just going to go back to what I had, and that's perfect. So the next thing we need to do is, these pixels at the minute are very clean. So if I zoom in, you'll see they're very clean, they're all very smooth, and it's not like real metal. So the next thing we have to do is add a bit of noise to it. So the way we do that is make sure we're on the right layer, which is metal, click Filter, Noise, and Add Noise. Okay, there's 2 main types of noise in Photoshop. I'll turn this way up so you can see it. So this is a general kind of colored noise that you get, so you can notice there's a lot of like pinks and greens and purples in there and blues. And the other type is what's called monochromatic, which means like one color, so black and white. So if I click on that, you'll notice now we're only putting in black and white noise. So I'm going to do set this amount here to about 5%. Make sure monochromatic's ticked on so we get black and white, and then that's fine. So what we're going to do there is just hit OK to commit that. Okay, so what you should have now is a noisy set of clouds all on this one metal layer. Your background should still be intact. It should be untouched. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a thin slice of this layer and we're going to stretch it out so it takes up the whole canvas. So the way we do that is we go back to our rectangle tool, our rectangle marquee tool. We're going to change the style back to normal. make sure we're on new selection. We're just going to click and drag a small box that takes up a couple of pixels. Okay? Now if you do make a mistake, all you need to do is push Control and D and that'll deselect it for you. Okay, so if you slip or you select a bit that's way too big, all you do is push Control and D and that's your deselect command. So what we're going to do is just grab a couple of pixels here and we're going to go and now we're going to scale this. Okay, so the way that we do that is a couple of different ways. We can go Edit, Transform, Scale, and that'll take us into it. Or the other way is Control and T. All we're going to do now is hover over here till we get these little arrows and then stretch this up so it fills the canvas. Okay, now Photoshop's waiting for you to commit it. So there's two ways you can commit it. You can hit the little tick up here, which is Commit Transform, or you'll notice the shortcuts showed there as well. So all you got to do is just push Enter in your keyboard. Okay, so that's the effect we're looking for. So kind of like a very machine-made kind of polished metal. Last thing we need to do is we still got a selection made. We want to push Control and D to deselect. Okay, so what we have now is this metal layer, and then underneath it we have that kind of concrete base that we started off with. So there's two things we can do here. We want this to blend through to the layer underneath, so we could turn down the opacity over here in the layers panel. So we still get this metal look, but now what we're getting is some of those, some of that dirt and kind of scratches from the concrete. Or the other thing we could do is we could change the blending mode. Okay, so you notice if I set it to darken, a lot of the white pixels become transparent, and it's sitting on top fairly well. Okay, so that's one way that you could do it. You can get like some fairly nice results of that. Obviously you can scroll through these and just depending on what your kind of base texture is, you might get some very different effects. Okay, what I found for mine was darken gave me kind of the most natural look. So I'm going to do set that to darken, and then I can always tweak the opacity. So just remember, these changes aren't final. You can always go back and change them later on. Okay, so I'm just going to set mine to darken. I'll tweak this down a little bit so you can see a little bit more. Right, so there we have it. So there's our kind of concrete layer with a metal, machine kind of made metal on top of it. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make some paint that's going to help us chip away and make it look like something's been kind of painted on this quite a while ago and then it's deteriorated over time. So the tool we're going to use for this is our rectangle tool, which is located just above the hand tool in the toolbar. So again, this might be hidden. You might have different ones. You could use a rounded rectangle to begin with. So I'm going to start off with a rounded rectangle. Okay, so up here you get different options again. The two options I want you to just double check is your radius, make sure it's set to around 10 pixels, and the stroke. So we want to turn off the stroke. So all we do is click on this box, and this here is the option that'll turn it off. So we just click. So a stroke is just Photoshop's way of saying a border. Next thing we want to do is just choose a color for the fill. So we're going to choose like a dark green, and all we do then is just click and drag our box. Okay. So again, this can be changed if you need to change it. You can double click on this icon here, and you can change the color. Okay. So what's actually come in here is it's what's called a smart layer. So it's like an object. So it means we can still change it on the fly fairly quick. It's not the same as our metal texture or metal layer. Our metal layer is a raster layer, so it's actually finished pixels. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make another shape. So we're going to make sure we're on the rectangle tool, not the round edge rectangle anymore. I'm just going to click on my metal layer, which means I'm not working on that rounded rectangle layer anymore. I'm just going to change the color to be yellow. Okay, so now I'm just going to click and drag a long box. Okay, and there it is. So what we want to do now is we want to duplicate this long rectangle, this kind of yellow strip. So there's a couple ways we can duplicate layers. You can right click on them and choose duplicate layer. You can click and drag them onto the new layer button, or you can use the long menu panel as well. Okay, so you can go layer duplicate. So it's the same as making a new layer. There's also a shortcut for it, which is Control and J on your keyboard. So it's up to you what way you want to do it. For now, I'm going to click and drag it onto the new layer button. Okay. And what that's done is it's made an exact replica of that layer, and the two of them are actually sitting on top of each other. So all I'm going to do is go to my move tool at the top here, and I'm just going to click and drag that over. Okay. So I'll turn off the visibility of my green layer just to make it a bit easier to show you. So what we're going to do now is we're going to flatten these two layers together. Okay. So same as the other options, there's a couple of ways we can do it. If we click on the top layer, hold down Control, we're going to click on the layer underneath. Now you could right click and choose Merge Shapes, or you can push Control and E. Okay, so what we've got now is these two shapes are both on the same layer. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to duplicate that layer. I'm going to do the same operation again. I'm just going to move this over, and then I'm going to merge these two together. Okay, so hold down Control, click on the two of them, and push Control and E. And then I'm going to continue this until I've got a set of yellow bars that run the whole width of the image. Okay, so one more time should do it. So hold down Control, Control and E, and that flattens them together. Okay, so I'm just going to rename these layers just to make it a bit easier. So double click, call it yellow bars, double click this, big green, I'm just going to change the order of these layers, so I'm just going to click and drag the big green layer to be underneath the yellow bars. Okay. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to duplicate the big green layer. So again, it's up to you what way you want to do it. I'm just going to click and drag it on the new layer button. I'm going to move it on top of the yellow bar layer. And then I'm just going to scale this. So if you remember from earlier, it's Control and T. I'm just going to come up here. I'm not going to use the little handles down here to do it. I'm going to come up here. I'm going to make sure that this little chain is clicked on, which is maintain aspect ratio. I'm going to hold over my W, and I'm just going to click and drag until I'm happy with the shape. Okay. So what that little chain does, it makes sure that your width and height stay in proportion. So if you scale something by 50%, it'll scale it in both directions. Same as before, it's waiting for me to push enter. And there, I'll just push enter to commit. So we've got one more thing that we want to do. I'm just going to turn off visibility of these layers just to show you. We're going to make some text. Okay, so your text tool is located here. Just on the second set of tools, you notice the tools are divided by these little horizontal lines. So on the second set of tools from the bottom, I'm just going to make sure I'm on the horizontal type tool. I'm going to change my color to be kind of like an off-white, and I'm just going to click and drag a box. Okay, this works very similar to word processing packages. So I'm just going to say level 09. Okay, now the font I'm using for this is Stencil. You can change your options up in the options bar here. So if you want to increase your font, you can do it there. You can also change your alignment. But I'm happy enough with the way this is set at the minute. Okay, so I'm just going to turn on my other layers so I can see where it's sitting. So I'm just going to grab my move tool. I'm just going to shift this down a little bit. Okay, so there you go. I'm happy enough with that. Last thing I want to do is just rotate this yellow bar layer. The way we're going to do this is Edit, Transform, Scale, or Control and T on your keyboard. So it's the same set of functions to get into your scale and your rotate. Okay, so Control and T. Now I'm not going to use these handles here, but I could do if I wanted. What I'm going to do is just come up in here. This is my angle box. I'm just going to set it to be 25 degrees and then push enter. The last thing I need to do is just move this slightly over a bit. Okay. So there you go. So at this stage you should have a text layer on top, which is set to level 9. You should have a small green, which I should have named earlier, which is that little green box there. You should have a yellow bars layer, which is that one there, and then you should have a big green, which is that back one. And underneath that we've got our metal layer, and then we've got our concrete background. Okay. So we're going to need So the next thing we need to do is we're going to create some paint effects, and then we're going to use these layers as almost like selection tools to delete that paint. Okay, so what I'm going to do to begin with is I'm going to turn off all these layers, just the visibility of them, and I'm only going to look at my background layer. Okay. So a good thing that I normally do is I normally duplicate my background layer, and then I hide a copy. So just in case anything goes wrong, I've always got that little backup copy. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to do a little bit of adjusting, just to slightly change the colors of this, just to get some better results. Okay. So what I'm going to do is a little thing called a levels adjustment. So anytime you're adjusting colors in Photoshop, you're normally in the same setting. So it's image, doing an adjustment, and here's your options. So we're going to choose levels. I'm just going to slightly tweak these. What these control is your blacks, your whites, and the grays of your image. Okay, so I'm just going to change that a little bit, because what I want is a lot of kind of whites and grays, and then these very solid blacks. Okay, so you notice that's my before and that's my after, so I'm just kind of draining some of those in between colors out of there. So I'm just going to hit OK. Now what we're going to do is make a couple of layers of paint, and then we're going to delete them one by one. So the first thing we need to do is make a new layer. So we just hit the new layer button, and we're going to call this paint 1. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to use a fill tool, like the paint bucket tool, which is located here. And sometimes it's a bit hard to find because it's actually in the same place as the gradient tool. So if you can't find it, if you look for the gradient icon, the shortcut for it is G. So I'm going to select this, and then I'm going to select what color of paint I want to use. Okay, so you use a fairly dark green. Now, if you look up on our options panel, what will happen at the minute is if I click on this layer, it's only going to look at the pixels in this layer. So it's essentially looking at that, which is an empty canvas. And then I click, it's just going to fill the whole layer full paint. And that's not the effect that we're going for. What we want it to do is look through that layer into our background layer and start filling little chunks of that. Okay. So the way we do this is a little option up here. It's called all layers. I just tick that on, and now if I click, what's happening is it's looking through to the bottom, and it's finding these massive chunks, these little small chunks in this case, of color. Okay. So you notice at the minute that's quite annoying because it would take quite a long time to fill that. So the way that we change that is a thing that's called tolerance. Okay. So tolerance is kind of Photoshop's way of selecting bigger sections. So it's being more lenient on what you're clicking on. So if I change my tolerance to 30 and I start clicking on kind of the same sections, you can notice now we're getting far bigger chunks of color. Okay, which weren't there before. So what's happening is I'm clicking on one pixel, and Photoshop's almost looking at 30 different shades similar to that, and it's spreading out my selection. Okay, so that's where we're going to have to adjust. So if we start off with tolerance of maybe 40, okay, all I'm going to do now is click. You notice now I'm getting these massive chunks, and that's what I want. Okay, so that's fine. So that's my paint layer 1. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to call this paint 2. So in this layer I'm going to put down some yellow paint, which is going to be for my yellow bars. So I'm going to go slightly different yellow, kind of like a bit of a more mustard colour. I'm just going to slightly adjust my tolerance to 35 because I want to end up with a slightly different paint pattern for this one. So again, I'm making sure I'm on that paint 2 layer. I'm making sure all layers is turned on. I'm going to start going through now and clicking so I can fill up this layer. Okay, so I don't want a perfect fill of color. I want it to be a bit sporadic. I want there to be patches missing. Okay, that's that. So again, we're going to turn off the visibility of that layer. We're just hiding it, and we're going to make another layer, and this is kind of going to be our last one. So for this one we're going to choose kind of like an off-white, almost grey. We're going to go with a tolerance of probably between 25 and 30, okay? So we'll try it with 25 to begin with. There we go. Same again, so we're just going to fill this up, and this is going to be our text that goes on top. So my way of thinking behind this is, I might just tweak it up to maybe to about 30. We get a little bit more coverage, there we go. My way of thinking about this is, this paint kind of went on last. It went on a couple of different layers of paint on top of it, or underneath it, sorry. So this should get chipped away quite a bit. Okay. So what we need to do now is, we've got these 4 layers of paint. I'm just going to move them to the top of my layers panel, just so it's a bit easier to work with. And then we've got these shapes underneath. So what we're going to do is, we're going to use these shapes as a template to delete big chunks of this. Okay, and the way we're going to do this is, we're going to turn on Paint 1, and we're going to show you how this works. So instead of us having to recreate this selection again, what we can do is we can hold down Control, and I'll just turn on the layer to show you how it works first. If I hold down Control and I hover over the thumbnail, I'll just zoom in so you can get a better look at it. You notice my icon changes, and it looks a lot like our rectangle marquee tool. Okay, so if I click there, what happens is it selects all the pixels on that layer, so it selects all the paint on that layer. So it's a really cool way of just having a really fast way of selecting that shape. Okay, so if I turn off the visibility of that layer, that selection still stays there. It might be a little hard to make out in the video. I can turn on my paint layer now. Now if I was to hit delete on this, what would happen is it's going to delete everything that's inside that selection. Okay, so if I push delete, I'm on Paint 1, so it'll only work on that layer. That's the effect we get. And that's not what we're looking for. We're kind of looking for the opposite of it. So if I just undo that. So undo, guys, in case you don't know, is I'm using step backward, which is Control Alt and Z. Okay? And that'll undo the last thing you did. So what I'm going to do is just select that again. I'm working on Paint 1, and I'm going to go select and then inverse. Okay, and the shortcut for this is Shift, Control and I. And what that does is totally reverses that selection. And now if I hit delete, it just deletes everything outside the green box. So I can kind of flick on to the green layer then, or the yellow layer, sorry, and I could do the same thing. Okay, so in the yellow layer I want to get rid of all this chunk outside, so I can keep my selection. That selection will stay there until I'm finished using it. And all I'm going to do then is just hit backspace, and that's going to bin that. Okay, I'm going to do the same with my text paint as well, which should be called Paint 3. And all I'm going to do is just hit delete. Okay, so whenever you finish your selection, Control and D. So the next thing we're going to do now is we're going to work on this yellow layer. Okay, so I'm going to turn off visibility of that. I'll turn off the visibility of my green layer. So what we want to do is we want to hold down Control and click on our yellow bar layer. That's going to use that as a selection. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go select and then inverse. I want to make sure we're on our Paint 2 layer, and we want to push delete. Okay. If you're ever happy with that, you can push Control and D on your keyboard to get rid of that selection. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to do the same for our text. Okay, so hold down Control. We're going to click on that T because the layer doesn't have a thumbnail. We're going to go select and then inverse. I'm going to hit delete with backspace. Okay. And what we should be left with is green layer, yellow layer, text layer on top. Okay. Now you might be wondering, why did I make the small green layer? That's the very last thing we're going to do. We're going to use that as a little selection tool, and we're just going to delete a chunk of our Paint 2 layer of our yellow bars. Okay. all I've done is just selected that by doing Control and click on the layer thumbnail, and now I'm on the yellow bar layer. I'm just going to hit backspace. Okay. So what that's done is it's given us, if I turn back on my metal layer, turn down the opacity so you can see through a little bit. There we go. So what that's done is it's given us an effect that the paint has all chipped off over time. Okay, and we've actually used real pixels, like real distortion, to do that. So if I zoom in here, you can see we've got our paint one, which is our green layer, and on top of that we've got our yellow layer, and then on top of that we've got our text layer, and it all matches up with actual distortion that's underneath. Okay, so it's a real easy way of getting a pretty cool looking effect. Now from here, what you can do is you can tweak your metal layer, so maybe you see more of it or you see less of it, just depending on what you're working on. So if we wanted to put this on like an actual kind of barrel, we might do something like this, where we see like a high opacity, or we might turn it down if we actually want to use like a concrete look. We can bin these layers here if you want, so I'm just going to really quickly show you how to select more than one layer. So if we click on the top layer, it's kind of like selecting files in your system. Hold down Shift, click on the bottom layer. I'm just going to drag them onto the bin icon. Okay. So hopefully you enjoyed the tutorial. Hopefully it's taught you kind of a couple more tricks. I'm just going to move that text in the middle a little bit. Okay guys, so that's one way you can do it. Again, this isn't 100% a hard and fast rule of how you can do it. This is just a way that I've kind of picked up over time. From there we can do kind of some different adjustments, so we can tweak the opacity of the paint layers, because obviously they might have faded over time. So you can tweak these down a little bit if you want, so maybe it sees through into the other colours underneath. Okay, that's just, hopefully I hope you've learned just a couple of different tools. Again, if you have any comments or suggestions or anything, feel free to drop them in the comments box below. If you like the tutorials I'm making and you're kind of interested in seeing a lot more, then by all means subscribe and keep an eye out for them. Okay, so thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it.